My name is Maya Chen and I am 33 years old. I took 8 weeks of maternity leave. When I came back, my business partner had registered our brand name, our logo, and our trademark in his name. Alone. Without telling me. Without asking me. While I was home with a newborn who was 6 weeks old. I had founded that company. I had named it. I had designed the logo on my kitchen table at midnight 4 years earlier. I had signed the first vendor. I had opened the first location. I had hired the first employee. My name was on the original LLC. And when I came back from 8 weeks at home with my baby, I was listed in the new documents as a contractor. A contractor. In my own company. He had done it on a Tuesday in October. My daughter was born on a Thursday in September. I found out when I tried to reorder packaging for our flagship product, the one I had developed the recipe for, the one that had been featured in a regional food publication 2 years earlier, the one that had put us on the map. And the supplier told me the brand account had been updated and I was no longer listed as an authorized contact. I said, "I'm sorry, can you say that again?" She said the account had been modified in October. The authorized contacts were now listed as David Park and David Park only. She was sorry for the inconvenience. I hung up the phone. My daughter was asleep in the carrier against my chest. I stood in the kitchen of my house, the same kitchen where I had designed the logo, where I had written the first business plan, where I had worked until 2 in the morning for 18 months before we opened our first location, and I held very still for a long time. And then I laid my daughter down in her bassinet. I sat at the kitchen table. I opened my laptop. And I started reading every document I could find about trademark law, LLC operating agreements, and what happens when a business partner commits fraud during a co-founder's maternity leave. Before I tell you what I found over the next 6 weeks and what I did with it, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your city in the comments. I read every single one. Subscribe to Karma Archives before we go any further, because what David Park did not know, what he could not have known, was that I had spent 4 years building this company with the specific documentation habits of someone who had once watched a friend lose a business dispute because she had nothing in writing. I had everything in writing. I had everything. Now let me take you back to the beginning of the company he tried to steal. I had opened the first location of Harvest & Company, a specialty food brand focused on small batch preserves, condiments, and pantry staples made from locally sourced ingredients, at 29. In a commercial kitchen space I had rented for $800 a month in the East Side neighborhood of our city. I had started it alone. The concept was mine, the recipes were mine, the branding was mine, and the first 18 months of 18-hour days were entirely, exhaustingly mine. David Park had come in at month 19. He was a friend of a friend, a former operations manager with retail experience who had approached me after seeing a feature on the brand in a local food blog. He made a compelling case. He could handle the operational complexity of scaling to multiple locations, the systems and the logistics and the vendor relationships that were already beginning to overwhelm me as a solo founder. He offered to invest $20,000 in exchange for a 30% equity stake and the title of co-founder. I negotiated him to 25%. I retained 75%. I had a lawyer draft the LLC operating agreement. It was specific, I had made sure of that. It described the ownership split, the decision-making authority, the process for major business decisions. It specified that changes to the company's registered name, branding, or trademark filings required approval from both members. It was, as my attorney had described it at the time, a clean document. David had signed it. We had both signed it. I had a copy in a filing cabinet and a scanned copy in my personal cloud drive and a third copy sent to my attorney's office because I was the kind of person who made 3 copies of important things. David was a good operations partner for 3 years. I want to be honest about that because the story is less interesting if he is simply villainous from the beginning, and because the truth is more complicated. He was organized, responsive, good with vendors and employees, and he understood the logistics of running multiple retail locations in ways that genuinely freed me to focus on the product and the brand. We disagreed sometimes on pricing, on expansion pace, on a proposed product line he wanted to develop that I thought diluted the brand's identity, but the disagreements were functional. The business was growing. By year 3 we had 3 locations, a small wholesale account with 2 regional grocery chains, and revenue that had tripled from year 1. Then I got pregnant. And something shifted in David that I noticed, but did not fully understand until it was too late. He became more interested in the financial structure than he had ever been before. He asked, more than once, about the operating agreement, specifically the clauses around ownership transfer, and what would happen to the business if one of the founders became, as he put it, less operationally available. I told him the operating agreement was clear on all of those points. He said he was just thinking ahead. I said I was thinking ahead too, and that what I was thinking was that we had a clear document and should trust it. I went on maternity leave on September 19th. David filed to register the brand name, the logo, and the trademark in his name alone on October 12th. He filed the trademark application with the USPTO. He filed an amendment to the LLC's registered documents with the state that listed him as the primary managing member with expanded authority. He updated the brand's supplier accounts and banking relationships to reflect his name as the sole authorized contact. He did all of this in a period of 23 days while I was at home with a 6-week-old. The supplier's phone call was the first thing that surfaced it. I do not know what would have happened if she had not called. Whether I would have found out at the point I came back to work and discovered my access had been changed, or whether he had been planning to address it then, whether he had prepared some story about a business restructuring that had become necessary in my absence, or whether he had simply planned to present it as a fait accompli and trust that the exhaustion of new parenthood and the complexity of the legal situation would make me less likely to fight it. I do not know. What I know is that I found out on a Monday when my daughter was 8 weeks old, and I did not sleep that night, and the following morning I called an attorney. The attorney's name was Christine Okafor. Business law, LLC disputes, trademark litigation, fraud. A friend who had sold her small business 2 years earlier had used her for the acquisition process and described her as someone who had read every document you handed her before you finished the sentence explaining what it was. She picked up on the first ring. I told her what I had found. She asked me 3 questions. Did I have the original LLC operating agreement? Did I have documentation of the founding history, the original filings, the early contracts, the vendor agreements, the bank account records? And did I have any communication from David during my leave that related to the business changes? I said yes to all 3. My filing cabinet, my cloud drive, my email inbox, which I had checked periodically during my leave and in which David had sent me 14 business update emails between September 19th and November 3rd, not one of which had mentioned the trademark filing, the LLC amendment, or the supplier account changes. Christine was quiet for approximately 10 seconds. Then she said, "Maya, what David has done is illegal on multiple grounds. The LLC operating agreement requires mutual approval for changes to the company's registered branding and trademark filings. He violated the operating agreement. The trademark application filed in his name alone for a mark that belongs to the LLC is fraudulent. It misrepresents ownership to the USPTO. The LLC amendment expanding his authority was filed without your knowledge or consent and is voidable. And his failure to disclose any of this to you while sending you regular business update emails during the same period is relevant to the fraud analysis." I asked what we needed to do. She said, "File an opposition to the trademark application immediately. The USPTO opposition period is time-limited, and we need to act before registration completes. File an injunction to freeze the LLC amendment. And begin compiling the founding history documentation because we are going to need to demonstrate, comprehensively, that you are the founding creator of every element of this brand." I asked how long it would take. She said, "The legal process takes time. What I can tell you is that the documentation you're describing, the original LLC filing, the founding contracts, the early bank records in your name, the vendor agreements, that is as strong a founding history as I have seen. He has 25% of the company, and he has forged his way to trying to claim 100. The gap between those 2 numbers is your case." I said, "File everything." I want to tell you about the 6 weeks between Christine's first call and the moment David found out that I knew. 6 weeks during which I did not return to work. I was still on leave. And during which David continued to send me business update emails that described operational progress at all 3 locations with the easy confidence of someone who believed the situation had already been resolved in his favor. He had not announced anything to the employees. He had not made any public changes to the brand's external-facing materials. He was, I understood when Christine explained the strategy of it, waiting. Waiting until the trademark registration completed and the LLC amendment was formally processed, waiting until the paperwork was done, before he did anything that would bring the situation to my attention in an undeniable way. He thought he had time. He thought the registration timeline gave him a window in which I would not find out, and that by the time I did, the legal landscape would be different enough to make his position stronger. What he did not know was that Christine had filed the opposition to the trademark application on day 3. The USPTO had placed a hold on the registration. The LLC amendment injunction had been filed with the state on day 5. And Christine had sent a formal demand letter to David's attorney. David had retained one, which told me he had anticipated a dispute on day 14. I know the exact moment David understood that the window had closed. It was a Tuesday evening when I received an email from his attorney, formal, professional, and notable for what it did not say. It did not deny the trademark filing. It did not deny the LLC amendment. It proposed a meeting to discuss the business's path forward and expressed David's hope that the matter could be resolved amicably and in the best interests of the company. The language of someone who has just realized the documents they filed are not the strongest card at the table. Christine called me after I forwarded her the email. She said, "He's going to try to negotiate. What do you want the outcome to look like?" I thought about my daughter, who was now 14 weeks old and who had spent the first 8 weeks of her life at home while her mother's business partner tried to steal the company her mother had built. I thought about the kitchen table where I had designed the logo. I thought about the first vendor contract, which had my signature and only my signature on it. I thought about 3 locations and a wholesale account and 4 years of 18-hour days and a filing cabinet with 3 copies of a very clear operating agreement. I said, I want the trademark withdrawn and refiled in the LLC's name. I want the LLC amendment voided and the operating agreement restored. I want his equity reduced to reflect the breach. Christine, what can we do there? She said we could pursue a buyout of his stake at a valuation that reflected the breach of fiduciary duty, which would be significantly below market. I said do that. And I wanted in writing that this never happened the way he's been hoping it happened, which means an amended LLC agreement that makes the founding history explicit and irrevocable. She said, that's a reasonable list. Let's see what he offers. The negotiation took 4 weeks. I was not directly involved in most of it. I went back to work at week 3 of the negotiation, back to Harvest and Company, to my 3 locations. To my employees who did not fully understand what had been happening, but who knew something had shifted in October and were visibly relieved when I walked back in. My head wholesale buyer, a woman named Tamara who had been with me since the beginning, pulled me aside on my first day back and said, I don't know what David did, but I'm glad you're back. I told her I was glad to be back. David's initial offer through his attorney was to acknowledge the operating agreement violation, void the LLC amendment, but retain the trademark filing as a business asset to be held jointly. Christine declined. She sent a counter with the full list of remedies and the valuation analysis for the buyout of his stake. David's attorney came back at week 2 with a revised offer that conceded the trademark but proposed a buyout at market value, which was, given the brand's growth trajectory, a significant number. Christine said, he's negotiating. We have more leverage than he's acknowledging. The breach of fiduciary duty during a co-founder's maternity leave has specific legal implications that will come up if this goes to litigation, and it will not be a sympathetic position for him in front of a judge or a jury. His attorney knows that. She sent a final counter. The response came in week 4. David accepted. The trademark application was withdrawn and refiled in the LLC's name within 10 days of the settlement. The LLC amendment was voided. His equity stake was bought out at a valuation that reflected the breach, 60 cents on the dollar of fair market value. He signed a settlement agreement that contained a specific clause acknowledging that the Harvest and Company brand, including its name, visual identity, and all associated intellectual property, had been created by and belonged to Maya Chen as the founding member of the LLC. His name, acknowledging my founding, in a signed legal document. Christine called me the day the settlement was executed. She said, it's done. You own your company. I said, I always own my company. She said, now the paperwork says so. Harvest and Company is now in its 5th year. We have opened a 4th location, something I had been planning before my leave and that David had been skeptical of and that I moved forward with 6 months after his departure. The wholesale account has expanded to 8 regional grocery partners. The brand has been covered by 3 national food publications. My daughter is 18 months old and has been to all 4 locations and has a strong preference for the strawberry preserve, which I consider excellent taste on her part. David Park is not in the specialty food industry. I know this through the particular information network of a small business community where people talk. I do not know what he is doing and I do not seek that information. I have a company to run. There are 2 things I want to say before I close this story. The first is about documentation. I keep saying it in every story I tell, because it is always the thing that makes the difference, and I want to say it one more time as specifically as I can. The LLC operating agreement that Christine used to challenge every single thing David had done was a document I had paid a lawyer to draft properly 4 years before any of this happened. It cost me $800. It was the best $800 I have ever spent. Not because I anticipated needing it against David. Because I was the kind of person who understood that the paperwork is not a formality, it is the thing that tells the truth when someone else is trying to tell a different story. The second thing I want to say is about timing. David chose to do what he did while I was on maternity leave because he believed that the vulnerability of that period, the physical exhaustion, the emotional absorption, the practical difficulty of fighting a legal battle with a newborn at home, would make me less likely to fight back effectively. He was wrong. Not because I am unusually resilient. Because I had the documentation, and because Christine Okafor exists, and because the law, when the documentation is right, does not actually care whether you are running on 4 hours of sleep or 8. He underestimated the paperwork. That was his mistake. I had 3 copies. Leave a comment and tell me, have you ever had someone try to take advantage of a moment when they thought you were distracted or vulnerable? Or has anyone ever underestimated you at exactly the wrong moment for them? I want to hear it. Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. Subscribe to Karma Archives. Every single day there is a new story. True workplace betrayal, real American business drama, family fraud, satisfying endings, r/pro revenge style, narrated daily for people who believe the work belongs to the person who built it. Karma does not take maternity leave. Subscribe. I'll see you next time.